Hey, good morning. This is Benjamin. Welcome back for another virtual IoT session. I think we were pretty quiet over the summer, but we're back in full speed, right? It's been only a week, I think, since we had our last virtual IoT session. Today, the topic is going to be IoT and security. And well, looking at the archives of the virtual IoT meetup, and I think we have dozens of webinars now. Security, for better or worse, we didn't really cover really well until today. So I'm really happy to be joined by Adi today. And actually, the story, if you're interested, is basically that we have there's lots of IoT conferences out there, right? And there is this one conference coming up. Organized by the same people we do, among other things, IoT World, and we like IoT much. And when we heard that the IoT Security Summit was coming up, we thought about doing some cross promotion, right? So if you happen to be in Texas, or if you want just in general to consider attending an IoT security conference. Next month, October the 15th until the 17th, the IoT Security Summit is, I think, going to be a great event. You can get a discount if you use the Eclipse keyword. But yeah, like that's how basically we got in touch with today's speaker, so Adi from GrabHub, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. So just before moving to this, kind of a general announcement. As always, the chat is here for you all to ask questions. I see that there's already more than 30 people watching, so that's great. Use the chat to ask questions, to interact among each other. That's also the good thing about the chat. Twitter is also a good way to ask questions using the virtual IoT hashtag. So yeah, today we will be collecting the questions and answering them at the end, but make sure to ask them as they come. That's the best way to not forget what you want to ask. And with that, that's it for my long-ish introduction. Adi, welcome. Thanks already. And yeah, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Benjamin. Thanks for the introduction. Security and standards in the Internet of Things. Just a quick introduction about myself. I'm Adi Balapur. I'm a team lead information security at GrabHub right now. I've authored Learning Metasploit Exploitation and Development. Go check it out. I constantly speak at multiple different conferences. Love evangelizing security, InfoSec in general. Love chatting all things cyber InfoSec on Twitter. So go ahead and follow me there. Usually hack for fun and as a hobby, and also pays my bills. Only ethical, full disclosure. Cool. So before we kind of dive into the presentation, I really wanted to share this picture with everyone out there on the webinar. Here we have a user who owns a smart home. And the smart home has a bunch of smart devices. We have the refrigerator, we have the smart oven, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the smart refrigerator is complaining that the user eats over 2,000 calories. The smart oven is complaining that the user always orders takeout, which is kind of good. And similarly, the light bulbs, the smoke detector, the fire alarm, the robo cleaner, which doesn't want to pick up trash. So Robert Cannon and Will Deming really summarized the state of IoT really well. Everything that can be automated will be automated. In God we trust, all others must bring data. That indeed is the world of the Internet of Things. And Gartner and the World Economic Forum have really summarized the growth and the scalability of IoT devices in the market really well. They've said it's going to roughly double the pace at which it's growing every 2 to 4 years. And we're expecting the number of IoT devices to globally reach roughly over 50 billion devices out there, which is good. and bad again in some aspects, right? Now, the insecure of things, or how has IoT done in terms of security in 2018, which is like the bad aspect from a security standpoint. I just wanted to kind of share some news snippets here with you all. We had passwords for tens of thousands of Dahua devices being cached in IoT search engines. We had Detroit fuel stations being hacked, and drivers running away with free gas. We had tons of dozens of defaced Canon IoT security cameras in Japan. This one was really scary. The latest baby monitors being hacked, and they being used to spy on the mother and her baby. 15,000 internet-connected devices being hacked to mine cryptocurrencies, which is becoming more and more common now. And I kind of like to really dive in and understand what was the basic problems behind a lot of these IoT security issues, and figure out what the vulnerability disclosures were, what was fixed, what wasn't fixed, and the reality for these were I'm quoting some CVE numbers here: 6301, which is arbitrary camera access and monitoring by cloud, and then we have lack of authentication, 9162. Unencrypted credentials in transit from the app to the camera, and then crashing the device with large request payload, 6479. Now, if you've been in security, and you've been talking about OWASP or certain app security, device security, these are really the general security best practices which you really need to start thinking when you're actually in the design phase and you're talking about or thinking about the product really. And based on the ease of exploitations, these metrics would relay the same meaning. This was a survey done by TrustWave, and they surveyed mid-sized and large-sized corporations in North America for companies using IoT, and what are the challenges they're facing introducing and planning security. So out of 137 surveys that were done, and again, the people who took the surveys had some sort of security experience. So these were security people, actually. So out of those, around 30% of people feel that in the next 12 months, their organization will have an IoT security incident. Around 25% of the people feel that in the next 2 years, they are going to have another security incident. So roughly, we have 55% of the chunk of people which think that there is going to be an IoT security incident in the future, which is really wider. And based on the increasing importance to security, the IoT security market has been going really fast up. And this is a research done by IoT Analytics, and the expected growth for the IoT security market is it's going to roughly hit $6 billion by the year 2023, with a compounded annual growth rate of roughly 45%, which is great. Now, whenever we talk about all this IoT innovation, disruption, new technologies, the IT and OT, the information technology and the operational side of technology is always a good discussion that comes up. Now, IT or information technology is how we process information, keep the data flowing. Operational side of technology is basically the processes that controls manufacturing, our factories, water pumps, water pipelines, nuclear plants, et cetera, et cetera. Now, traditionally, it's always been IT versus OT. And there have been several reasons for that. IT has been really dynamic, and it's constantly changing how it handles the data. People in IT, the way they want to progress is they want to innovate the processing, the amount of data that can be handled, the memory consumption, the faster networks. Operational side of technology has mostly been static and has only focused on a fixed set of instructions. The expectation for an OT device is really, it's a specific function that it's required to do, and it's expected to work flawlessly for tens of tens of 20 years, in high humidity, high temperature environments, without any sort of human help or human efforts. A lot of times, confidentiality, integrity, availability is more important for IT. The CIA tried, as it said. For OT, or operational technology, safety, stability, availability is more important. Human lives are at matter, right? If you take an example of a data center, you won't see operational side of people, OT people handling data center and networks. And similarly, for taking an example on the OT side of things, let's say if it's a high-tech oil drill, it would be an OT person who would be basically managing the technology of that. Which is why, IT doesn't have an understanding of OT a lot of times. And operational technology people would always think, why do we need IT? Because they're trained on those specific set of skills, and technology is really better. Patching and upgrade, that's not really a surprise for IT. Threats, risks, vulnerabilities have been out there for roughly a lot of number of years now. We've had Patch Tuesdays going on for a really long time. And I'm not saying there aren't good and bad organizations, but again, a general sense of patching vulnerability and bugs has been there in IT. But OT really suffers from the don't touch syndrome, where, as I said, they're expected to verge of tens of hundreds of years, possibly. The problem with that is that there isn't a good way to patch those devices a lot of times. And, that could really impact their maybe production or factory cycles and just bring that down, which is possibly a big loss to the business. Information security isn't a surprise for IT. We've had IT and security, or IT security working together, for a really long term now, a number of years now. But for the operational side of technology, it's been mainly physical air gapping that's been the primary security controls around those sort of technologies. Now, to take an example of digital manufacturing, how do you really manufacturing? You have to think about your business processes, technologies, models. Manufacturing companies really need to start thinking about more operational efficiency, setting up a competitive edge, maximizing profits, really, right? And if you really dive into that, at the end of the day, IT and OT really need to work together to kind of achieve that. So what are some of the challenges that could really occur between, in such a model? It has to be a shared responsibility model for the IT and OT alignment. And confidentiality, integrity, availability, safety, stability, all has to be important. That is when we can all come together from an IT and OT perspective. Leadership and board of directors buy-in is really important, because unless it's acceptance from the top, it really is hard to trickle down the same culture down to the teams and people who are actually be working on those models. The digital transformation would unlock the industrial Internet of Things, IIoT, which is it's called. It unlocks large amount of data, analytics, better monitoring, better management of systems, geographically spread. And you better train security in IT to understand OT. That could be one way, possibly. Searching for common goals and standards to collaborate on expectations. Security could be a major key where IT and OT can just start saying, hey, let's deal with security as a single point of project, and go from there to kind of collaborate together. Industry partnerships between more IT and OT providers could be a starting point, which they can start selling as one thing product where IT and OT can start collaborating more. Just want to remind everyone again, please keep asking questions. The future looks bright. That's what I feel. And I do see IT and OT sharing some love definitely together in the coming years. Any big Star Wars fans in here? Come on, please pass some comments. But yeah, just every year we have these stream of IoT devices which are always flowing in. All the innovation, the disruption that is always happening in the IoT world, and frankly speaking, everyone loves these great devices. The great flexibility which it brings from a user experience perspective, right? But what happens to security, like increasing innovation and decreasing security? Is that really the answer? Because that's really hard. And when we kind of go and talk about security in IoT, there are a bunch of suggestions that or problems that come up where people might say, we didn't just think about during the idea phase or the designing phase or the source phase. But I feel IoT, needs to be thought about in every phase. Either it be the idea, the design, the source, the make, the delivery, the maintenance. Every sort of cycle has to have a security component to it for better IoT security. And Bruce and I really summarized, I think 2 years back at RSA really well. If everything becomes a computer security becomes everything security. And since IoT is basically an everything problem, we need to deal it as an everything security to kind of, get into a much better and mature state. Now, again, some stats from IoT analytics. Where are the weaknesses across multiple devices, multiple IoT devices that were found? We had problems across authentication, authorization, access controlling, data encryption, unpatched vulnerabilities, hardware chip security, data leakage, firewalls, passwords. It's not being focused on one specific thing. It's like really focused on a concept of an IoT development lifecycle overall, which is why I feel it has to be tackled at every standpoint. Now, what are some of the challenges that are being faced by enterprises, to solve problems for IoT security? For any organization, the security problems are basically, solved, based on the risk assessment and prioritization. For an organization, for example, ransomware could be a huge problem. We had WannaCry where, it encrypted a lot of devices and computers, and that is what an organization might be just planning in, let's say, 2018 or 2019. Compliance initiatives could be another thing that the company might be planning, followed by API security, phishing. So it really depends on what the risk assessment is and how it's being tackled to prioritize. Organization policies, do we need to solve these at a policy level? We already have a lot of data handling, encryption, classification. Do we need one for IoT? That could be possibly a challenge which enterprises feel to kind of standardize security. What's the current user base on revenue model? Are the users more on web, followed by mobile, followed by other IoT devices? That could be a big question or a big challenge for organizations. Compliance-driven motivations. Do we need organizations or compliance organizations to start looking at more IoT devices? Because they're more focused probably on the web, the mobile part. Do we start changing that as removing a challenge? Internal security teams aren't the absolute answers because a lot of times they don't have the expertise to kind of go in, dig deep, and understand what those IoT security problems are. Another common issue which we come across is cost constraints. Now, a $10 device in some part of Asia might do the same thing. It could be just a simple thermometer or a refrigerator smart component. Compared to like $100 product in the US, what is the the benefit that the user gets. Is it only security? Do we need to start thinking or decreasing the cost of security at that point in time? These kind of questions come up for organizations. Patch management, it's still hard. Like, some organizations are good, but for some organizations, it's still hard to get patch management working. Or is standards and regulations the answer? Do we create standards and make organizations follow that, or do we start regulating at a government level or at a global nation level? So as we talked about IoT security standards, here are some of the IoT security standards. You have the OTA, the Industrial Internet Consortium, the NIST, the IEEE, the ISO, the OWASP, the CSA. This is only a subset of the standards that's out there in the IoT security market. But there are many, many more IoT security standards based on industries. Now, as I was kind of doing some research around understanding, have people or have countries globally agreed on a simple standard? Because so many standards causes more confusion, and it's more problems for companies, for people to solve, because the challenge is, which standard do they follow? So kind of doing some research, I came across the World Health Organization, which is the world's, it's a consortium of roughly 63 countries, and they basically control the list of global essential medicines. They control policies and requirements around controlling HIV, Ebola, tuberculosis, and they set the standard, which are again globally followed, which is great. So there has been agreement on at least problems concerning public health. Then we had the sun protection factor or sun safety standards. It's a simple example. It's called as SPF for sunscreens which you use. Now, as the amount of UV rays, the ultraviolet rays, started increasing and starting adverse effects for the skin, global nations started to agree on an actual value for SPF, which is required as a protection for the skin. So globally, we have around 50 plus SPF values, which is agreed on by so many nations, which is a great thing. So that kind of public health that's what's required, to people or companies to start focusing on a single set of standards, or can we do something else to kind of agree together on one simple standard? And if you go on and dive deep into these standards, they talk about some of these things: IoT interoperability, tamper-resistant hardware, patching updates, vulnerability scanning, pen testing, data protection at rest and transit. Again, industries might differ, but the basic asks are all the same. And that's why I feel interoperability is so important to get to a single standard, because there are too many players in the market. It's proprietary standards being enforced, again, by leaders, which try to maintain the competitive edge, which makes sense, right? It's driving their business, it's driving their values. But little progress is being made towards a single interoperable framework. Is open source framework the answer? Things like KA project, Device Hive, etc. Selecting the right platform, IoT platform, is that important? Should we start focusing on common services like MQTT, application layer, COAP, etc.? Is that a possible way? Because without interoperability, it's going to be really hard, because the ecosystem of IoT won't work. And the smart fridges, the smart lights, they won't really interact with each other. If you start differentiating between manufacturers, which is why I kind of stress on the interoperability and instead of single standards. And the NIST body put up this 8200 document, and I'm quoting from there. They really did a really cool thing of kind of standardizing the core cybersecurity areas and how our industries, the various industries, doing based on that. So we have some core cybersecurity areas and various different industries like connected vehicles, consumer IoT, health IoT, and medical devices. smart buildings, etc. And let's take an example of cryptographic techniques. There are standards available right now. We have a strong push to use elliptic curve cryptography, DTLS for low-power devices, but it's still a slow uptake in the market, which is why it's hard to get that encryption in transit thing going and encryption at rest thing going for a lot of IoT devices. Cyber incident management, there are some standards, but when you think about it from an incident standpoint, what happens a lot of times is these low powered small devices, and once they have a vulnerability, the only way to kind of fix that vulnerability is basically by replacing them, because it's hard to just push a patch out them a lot of times. Now, how do you really manage an incident from that standpoint? Which is where I feel we need to have some sort of compensating controls till we can really patch a system or like replace a system, which can decrease the exposure for an organization from a security standpoint or an incident standpoint. Identity and access management is really being strongly pushed forward. The need to have PKI, the need to establish root of trust, and the need to have the ability to revoke identities is really important. Similarly, we have information security management system. We have IT system security evaluations where we need some standards because there aren't any implementations yet. So with multiple standards, what's really goal that I'm really trying to push for? Like, we really need some sort of an information sharing and analysis center, because standards are siloed because they can depend on different countries, they can depend on different industry sectors, and that really creates a lack of global information sharing and coordination. There is a general consensus of things, as we saw in the various different standards, and hence, like, different various bodies are really trying to push to have a solution for the similar set of problems. But we still need more collaboration across IoT manufacturers, service providers, SaaS providers, etc. The government can help enforce standards. They can lead by example and play an important role. And we also saw that, with the Cyber Shield Act of 2017, the Internet of Things Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2017, also the Security and Privacy in Your Car Act 2017. The CA Browser Forum is a great example. That's what I feel from a technical standpoint, from a security standpoint, which I'll just cover in a minute. It's a universal standard for certificate authorities for browsers. And they have solved some really unique problems in the state with which we're progressing towards improving security across browsers is really great. This is, again, a picture of some analysis from Google that we roughly have over 75% of traffic being served or pages being served over HTTPS, based on the major countries out there, which is a great achievement. The SHA-1 deprecation across certificates was really great. The move to TLS, as I talked about, domain validation methods to catch bad certificate authorities, the CAA DNS records, the certificate transparency records, that's been a real boon to catch phishing attempts, etc., from a security standpoint. Now, we talked about standards and how great it would be if we can all agree to a single set of standards. But how does regulation really play a part? Too much regulations and too less regulations could be both bad. So we really need to have some sort of a balance. Here again, some news snippets which I want to share. Without clear regulations, cryptocurrencies and their innovation is becoming an issue in the US. Self-driving cars, they continue to face little resistance right now from the government. The FDA, is that too tough on medical device makers, or is that important? The FAA's safety rules across commercial drones, are they overly strict just because of how the regulation works there? Please keep asking questions. I'll get to as many questions as I can. But yeah, you can tweet me as well, or reach out there. Regulations, the more dollar spend and less innovation. Can we agree on a level playing field, really? For large corporation versus startup, the dollar value or the dollar spend could be a really big factor, if you really want to focus on more and more regulations. Because then they start spending that amount of money on focusing on, getting regulated rather than innovating and, disrupting. Should we look at regulations from or liability from a regulation standpoint for only manufacturers, or does that need to be a shared ownership model, where IoT service providers are also need to be regulated? Do we need to have a separate, different regulating body for the IoT, or does the FAA, the FTC, the SEC, they start looking into it? Do we want to force security into products, or do we want to closely align vendors and security experts and policymakers, all come together, for the greater good of IoT? Now, when you kind of focus on regulations, is really medical device failures, car crashes, home automation failures, is that's what's required to act and regulate the market? Or can government stampings like the FIPS certification, can that really be the answer? We can start looking at it from an insurance standpoint. Do insurance providers start pushing for better and lack of security from their underwritings, their premiums, and their models from there? Or should we start focusing on rather a common standard and a set of practices there? Here's a study from Gemalto where it's said that where exactly we need to focus on regulations. This was an analysis done from their side. And they clearly say that we need to regulate a lot of people, IoT service providers, manufacturers, cloud service providers. So the idea is pretty much regulating each and everyone. So a shared responsibility model is what we're looking at. And then what we also need to regulate is data storage and the security that needs to go in there. Who's responsible for securing the data at each stage of its journey? Now, we talked about in the IoT space. For people who don't know about Grubhub is the nation's leading online and mobile food ordering company, which is dedicated to connecting hungry diners with local takeout restaurants. We have a bunch of IoT integrations. We have presence on the Samsung Family Hub refrigerators, the Amazon Alexas, the Apple and the Android iOS stores. And we do a bunch of things, things like continuously innovating and driving market growth across diners and restaurants by introducing new IoT integrations. Our product security development closely aligned to work together to have safer products. For us, no new IoT integration is the same, and that's where we focus on threat modeling each new integration, secure coding practices, continuous vulnerability scanning and code dependencies, penetration testing, multiple red team engagements, instant response drills. We really start or like focusing on training security champions, and that's how we scale security, by developing each person as a champion for security. IoT security industry is growing rapidly, and that's where we try to keep up pace with growing up to date in new standards, and closely working with these vendors on new APIs, new integrations, how it's going to affect our products. And this is how I'd really like to end this presentation. What the future holds. This is a snippet from the Wall Street Journal. We have a bunch of IoT devices, which are all voice controlled. Mike, the oven; Frank, the refrigerator; Diana, the dishwasher; and Tony, the dustbin. it's really an IoT world. How can we control that? Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So we actually have a question already from Michael. The question is, can you comment on Dan Geer's idea, more specifically, so I don't know if you read or know the cybersecurity as realpolitik manifest that Dan Geer wrote in 2015. Any thoughts on that?
I'll have to look at that. Sorry, I haven't read that. I'll definitely take a look and respond back on that.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar either, but it looks like yeah, there's some resources online. I will post a link on the chat actually, because
I can get back to that.
Yep. So I think there's some good resources. A slide here. What do you think are like the resources for learning about security and for like becoming? Because I think basically one challenge is that there's just so many aspects to security, and where do you think should people start basically?
So I think it's always a good start to focus on the fundamentals. That's how it really starts, and going from the bottom down to the top up approach is always good. So you look at the fundamentals, and some of the IoT security standards, as I talked about, really talk about fundamentals, and then go on specifics on how IoT has to deal with them. If you take data encryption in transit, like a simple way to solve that is using certificates, right? And ensuring we use more and more HTTPS, TLS, DTLS, based on the device, really. Similarly, encryption at rest, that can be sort of solved at easily. Authentication, authorization, that's the growing concerns right now, because it's hard to kind of control how these different devices authenticate, from a user standpoint, and even across themselves. How do you control that? So it really comes down to the basics, the fundamentals, as I said. And once you can understand what's really required from a basic or a fundamental standpoint, you can really start pushing on getting the expertise of focusing on specific layers, focusing on specific protocols, how you can harden those. And there are a lot of guidelines over there. Like I'd really suggest to start looking at some of the IEEE standards. There are OWASP standards as well, some of the NIST standards. And those will really give you a good overview of how things are from a state of security perspective.
Right. Thank you. Alex is asking a question on the embedded side. Do you think the microcontrollers now have advanced enough functionality in terms of cryptographic services at all levels, basically, or not? Because Alex adds that this used to be the excuse in the last few years.
Yep, I think they're doing really well. We have onboard chips, onboard TPMs being in place on microcontrollers now. So cryptographically, I think embedded firmwares are really doing well and like really progressing in the cryptographic market. We have cryptographic engines and chips also being embedded now and there. So I feel it's really going fast. The problem where we really need to solve is how do we for low power devices, how do we really get those cryptographic engines in there and chips and firmwares in there that can solve cryptographic problems. I think we'll still have to see more and more improvements around that. But overall, I think the industry is just growing really fast, and it's all good for the state of security.
Right. There's the next question is, I think, actually two questions in one. How widespread are actuators versus just simple sensors? Are we talking about 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000? And sort of related, do you think that controllable devices should have more security attention paid to them, or should we aim for a high level kind of security mechanism across the entire network and across all the devices?
As I'll go back to my presentation. As I said, security is an everything problem, right? And that is where I always start or always ask people to focus on pretty much every aspect of development or every aspect of a product. So solving the problem just at a sensors level or an actuators level is or even a network level is not is not the solution. You really need to look at as like a holistic picture of things. And that is how you basically threat model, because adversaries and bad actors are growing. There is hardly any trust in the network. So if you start focusing on only specific aspects of security and only specific models of security, it's really hard to fight out all these advanced adversaries that might start seeing or start looking at exploiting at a sensor level functionality, or an exploit or a vulnerability there. So I think it's a layered approach which people need to focus at or need to look at, and that is how the right approach should really look if you're strategizing your security.
Right. So maybe just like we have full stack developers, we should have full stack security engineers that know enough about embedded, enough about network security, enough about data protection to sort of oversee.
Yeah, it's a mix. It's a mix, right? Let's talk about from an OSI model perspective. You need to start thinking about security at every level. Whether it's application, it's network, it's data. You need to start focusing on security at every and each aspect.
Yep. Actually, slowly be running out of questions. There's probably still a few people to ask questions if there are questions. And maybe while we wait for questions, I'm actually having a quick look at our agenda for the next few weeks. So yeah, that's what I thought. We actually have another meetup next week. It's going to be about the Eclipse Agile open source project and building a multi-protocol gateway with application data and cloud services features. So it's kind of a mouthful, but yeah, check out the meetup page and RSVP if you'd like to attend. We also have an actual live meetup sort of next week in Singapore. We are organizing an Eclipse IoT Day in co-location with IoT World Asia. And there's certainly still time for you to register if you happen to be in the area. Check out the program. So it's going to be on next Tuesday, the 18th, and we have great speakers and great talks about QTT, about industrial IoT, about fog computing. So yeah, I know that not necessarily all of you are from the area, but if you are, you should certainly consider attending. So with that, I think we're actually, I don't see additional questions. So the video will be available on YouTube for everybody to watch the replay. So if there are any questions for those of you watching the replay, just post them in the comments, and we'll make sure that Adi answers them, and we will forward the questions. So Adi, thanks again. I think that was a really great session, and usually when there are questions at the end, it means that you sort of made a point, and I like the conversation that we had after your session. So thanks a lot, and good luck with the IoT Security Summit next month. Alex is asking on the chat maybe one last question, and it's a good one that was also coming to my mind. Will you be putting your slides on SlideShare or somewhere?
Yes, I will be putting my slides on SlideShare, and I'll post a link on the YouTube channel.
Excellent. So that's all that people need to get more information. Yeah, and there's like 2 or 3 slides full of links and references. So I think this is going to be a great resource for interested in
but yeah, if you have more questions, please reach out to me on Twitter. Would love to answer you.
Thank you. I will be adding your Twitter handle just now in the chat for wrapping things up. So yeah, thanks everyone. It was great as always, and we will be back next week. Thanks, Adi.
Thanks a lot. Bye now.